Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. My guest today is Dr. Bob Nelson. Bob is an assistant professor in the Kremen School of Education and Human Development in the Department of Educational Leadership. He also currently serves as the founder and CEO of Militant Positivity, LLC, a speaking, consulting, and podcasting educational organization. In his professional career prior to serving in higher education, Dr. Nelson served over 7.5 years as the superintendent for Fresno Unified, California's third largest school district, serving approximately 72,000 students. Previously, he served as Fresno Unified's chief of staff and held a wide range of educational positions, including elementary teacher, resource teacher, technology specialist, vice principal, and human resources labor relations administrator. In addition to serving in Fresno Unified, he was the superintendent of the Chewonaki Unified School District, representing the Sierra Foothill communities of Eastern Madera County from 2012 to 2015. Additionally, Bob previously served as a lecturer in the Department of Counseling, Rehab, and Special Education at Fresno State, where he received his master's in educational administration and supervision. Bob is also a graduate of the University of Southern California and recently completed his doctorate in organizational change and leadership from USC in May of 2018. Bob is the father of 7 children, ranging in age from 30 years old to 10-year-old twin boys. He's a huge advocate for foster children with special needs, adoption, and social media use in education. Specialties: community and cultural development, social media use in education, public sector union negotiation, recruitment, talent management, staff selection, professional development, mediation, educational leadership, special education, foster education, child development, and I think you're going to find a super podcast guest. I think you're going to like this one. Bob, welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works.
It's an honor to be with you, Gene. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Well, I'm so excited to get to talk to you because we have a lot of teachers. We have people who talk about teaching and learning, but there's a lot of people who think, well, why just don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And so a couple of weeks ago, I had somebody who works with board members. And now I wanted you to talk about, why things do or don't happen, at the superintendency level. So I'm very excited to have you.
It's an honor to be here. I think, the superintendent can have an outsized role. It's interesting. You would think a superintendent would keep or lose their job on the basis of whether kids are learning, but that's not always the reason. Like, it has very little to do and much to do with the political reality of a school district, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, I want to start by exploring a little bit your professional journey, because one of the things that folks talk about a lot when they get into the educational system and they want to stay in the educational system is that career ladder. And you had a full career at Fresno Unified. I think you checked every box.
I think, I don't know that there's a traditional path to the superintendency, Gene, but I suppose mine is probably as traditional as could reasonably be expected. I was the first internal candidate at Fresno to actually take the superintendency in about 30 years at the time I assumed the role, which was back in 2017. I started as a teacher in Fresno. I actually started as a substitute teacher in Fresno in 1991 and then got a job teaching elementary school. I did that, was a lead teacher, like a professional development leadership coach, teaching coach. And then I was a vice principal. I worked in human resources for a period of 4 years, which was really seminal and taught me a lot. And then I actually left the district for a 3-year period. We live in Eastern Madera County, so I went and took the superintendency of a little district called Chewonaki Unified, so 1,200 student district. If you've ever heard of Minarets High, I was a superintendent there. And then applied to be the leader of human resources back in Fresno and did not actually get that job, came in second, like a finalist, but did not get it. And as a kind of a offshoot of that, I became the chief of staff instead. And then so I was the chief of staff until my predecessor, you know, moved away from that position. And then I guess I was like the least hated available choice at the time of the transition. I wasn't the most beloved. I was probably the least openly detested available choice, and became the interim, and then spent quite a long time, actually, 7.5 years in the superintendency in Fresno. So 3 in Shawanaki, 7.5 in Fresno. So 10.5 years in the superintendency. From a longevity standpoint, that's a long time as a superintendent.
That's a long time for a superintendent. I want to go back, and if you could expand on what the job is of the chief of staff, because there are many districts that don't have a chief of staff.
Yeah, Fresno's large. It's California's 3rd largest district. And at the time I was there, it was about 73,000 students. So the chief of staff kind of runs, there's a parallel like with the federal government. The chief of staff kind of sets the policy guidelines and works as a member of the superintendent's cabinet to kind of make sure that, requests get filtered through that individual and that they align with what the mission and vision of the superintendent is at that time. And then, to some degree, you serve as a superintendent's proxy in situations where the superintendent is not immediately available to do those things. So you're kind of the person that, convenes the cabinet for the superintendent in their absence. And so, ideally you serve as a confidant to the superintendent. You make sure that things are in alignment with what that person's vision, goals and values are. And so, yeah, but it's also like, as you talked about, it tends to be something that happens in larger districts, and it's not. And, in Shawanaki, there was nothing like that. I was the only certificate administrator in the district office at all. There certainly weren't like layers of the bureaucracy like the chief of staff role.
So just for a little bit of contrast, Fresno Unified, around 72,000 students, and Shawanaki, how many students approximately?
1,200, 106 elementary schools in Fresno, and actually just like 6 schools overall in Shawanaki. So small rural, really small rural, 5-member board, and then major urban 7-member board. But, I think in my retrospect, like they're probably as similar as they are dissimilar in a lot of ways. You still have trustees who want good things for young people. Certainly Fresno is a lot more political. You have people getting elected to the board who see themselves as like city councilors or, county supervisors in embryo, which adds a different layer of complexity in the politics of right and left. But, you still have to you're still a mayor of a small town. You're still accountable for any things that may go wrong in your district. If you're a good leader, you stand in the gap and apologize for stuff you yourself would never do. That part is exactly the same.
Yeah. So thinking back, going back to like a career ladder, I think what was interesting about reading your history is that many folks think, who want to become a superintendent, it's like, well, I'm going to start in a small district. And then I'm going to get some experience, and then I'm going to get to a bigger district. But as I looked at what you had done in all the different capacities in Fresno Unified in a large district, God, it made sense. I mean, look what you were able to bring to a small district.
When I think that part was great. I actually think the time I spent in human resources was really helpful because honestly, 80, 85, 90% of your budget is grounded in people. So kind of understanding how that works. And I did labor negotiations as a portion of that work too, which served me well. And obviously in California, that's something that you need to be able to manage, is trying to have effectual. And, I wasn't without my shortcomings on that. We darn near came to a strike twice in Fresno Unified when I was at the superintendency. We did not strike, but it was certainly tense. And I think, the piece of being like a professional developer, like in understanding what good pedagogy is from a teaching perspective, I think your superintendents that came through the business services office, I'm not throwing shade at that, but I think it's hard to gain traction with teachers if you haven't actually done their job ever. And, people say, you haven't taught in forever. I mean, you're always fighting a battle of like credibility. And I'm doing that too. I don't know how long an ex-superintendent maintains their juice. Like, I have no idea what that is. But the reality of it is it's hard to opine on issues of teaching and learning if you've never sat in a classroom and done that work, and it's not the same doing it in higher ed as there is doing it in K-12.
Well, the other thing that was interesting is that people couldn't see me, but I was smiling, almost laughing when you were talking about the importance of the labor negotiations and that labor relations and all the HR stuff you have to deal with. Because when I was getting my administrative credential, And I always say I was not, I cannot say I was a good administrator in any sense of the word. But one thing that I learned when I was getting my credential is that things that had to do with special ed. And here's how I learned it. I sat next to a school psych, and we would be in a class about maybe, how kids get into special ed. Things were different back then, but there was a student study team, and we go to this level, and she would just lean over and whisper to me, "That's wrong." And then at the break, she would educate me on that. And then I got to double check because my wife was a special ed teacher, and I would have never got the good information that you want to get into trouble at a school site, right? Screw up special ed.
For sure.
You
No
want to
question.
you want to get in trouble in the district, screw up labor relations.
That's
So,
exactly right. Yeah. And I think, I share some similarities with you. I mean, one of the things that, I'm a father of a number of children, many of whom were adopted from foster care in Madera County. And the common thread is 5 of our 7 kids have an IEP. And so if I have an affinity group to speak of, it is the same as what you just described, right? Special needs youth are a big part of my life. And, some kids for whom they need a fair shake and they need an advocate for on behalf of them. And so, yeah, like having a trusted insider who can give you like insights about whether what you're hearing is really real, really nothing replaces that. I would argue too, like, my administrative assistant as a superintendent was my predecessor's administrative assistant, then mine, and it is now my successor's because she is loyal to the desk of the superintendency of Fresno Unified. And it's the same type of thing. Like her screen for what is fair, reasonable, and real is so great that people don't trifle with her. Like she's the real deal. You don't mess with Maria.
okay, so let's get back to advising these folks who want to become superintendents and they're at a small district. You had all this experience in a large district, all of your experience in education in the large district prior to going to Chewonki. So what was different than you thought it would be as you took the reins there?
What's different there is you're fighting like Chewonki is all horizontal. You don't have, I mean, Fresno is very vertical. You have columns of people in the org chart, and those groups believe that their work is sacrosanct, and there's not a lot of working across the white spaces in the organizational chart. Chewonki is entirely different. You touch everything. I mean, somebody gave me a hard time. One of my chief business people called me the hot dog bun superintendent because we didn't have hot dog buns and I had to take them from North Fork to Spring Valley. So in a small district, you do whatever is required. And if that's delivering hot dog buns, okay, then that's your job and you have to do those things. And so, which for me works really well. And honestly, I cut my teeth around using social media as a means to communicate with the local community because you have to kind of tell your own story. You don't have redundancy in the communication division. I had a really good thing in Chewonki that maybe I didn't fully understand. And sometimes if you spend your entire life in one district, you get the false impression that's the only way that school happens. And I think what I really learned is like, there's a lot of different ways school happens. And a lot of people view the things that are being done or they approach those situations differently. So I have zero regrets on stepping out of the major urban district, which kind of I cut my teeth in to go to another system and to learn how things were functional there. The best part about Chewonki is mostly your board was parents and grandparents who wanted really good things for kids. And honestly, Gene, their claim to fame, like if I didn't screw up the ag program, like I was fine. 4/5 of them had ag interests and so as long as Minarets and Chewonki had strong FFA and 4-H, and I, was supportive of that, I seemed to be in good standing. That was a major priority for that community. And just understanding, what people want for their kids, I think is 9/10 of it. Like, are you talking to the people and are you with them enough to know what they want to see happen for their young people?
But did you know that was a priority when you went there? Did they make it known?
No, I had very little
No.
clue. Honestly, like, well, my own kids went through that thing and then they ended up raising goats and the whole bit, got the blue corduroy jacket and the whole, like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
that became our life. But I didn't really know. I mean, I had not had much experience with any of that prior to assuming that role. So, but that, if you know anything about FFA, that's a subculture all its own too. And ag teachers are worthy of their hire, man. They can almost fetch any price because they work so far beyond the beaten track. But it was really good for my kid. I mean, and there's a lot of ways that FFA encourages young people to speak well and to understand Robert's Rules of Order, a lot of different things. It's more than just, animal raising. But yeah, I had no idea that was such a priority. And Minarets prided itself on doing things that are kind of a little bit outside of the norm. It was a new school that was kind of like charting its own path. There's a mainline high school and then a charter school embedded in the same school campus. And so they did some things innovatively. And so, it was, and being in a small district, honestly, there was more anonymity in being the superintendent in Fresno, even though I might be on the cover of the Fresno Bee or NABC 30. It was actually easier on my wife and our family than it was living, working, and being subsumed in the same community, which was really hard in Shawanaki. I mean, I had dealing with issues of like expulsion of a kid at church on Mother's Day. Those are hard things, right?
Yeah. No, the small community, if you haven't been involved in one, it's very different. So you brought a lot of experience that helped you when you went to Shawanaki. How about now when you moved back? What did you learn as a superintendent of a small district when you became superintendent of the large district?
I think in Shawanaki, there's so few people, you're left to the obligation of a leader is that you really have to give other people assignments or, you have to share the vision and then you have to let them flounder, succeed, and you have to give them all the credit. And that's equally true in Fresno. So trying to build a cabinet in a big district, which is people that didn't look like, talk like, sound like, live like, or have my shared lived experiences. So they pushed my thinking on every decision that was made. And then you let them take the credit for the good things that were happening. I'm super proud of the fact, I was trying to count it up the other day. I have like 6 or 7 people that served on my cabinet who are all superintendents in the Valley in their own right now and have all been very successful. I do believe that's one thing as a leader. You're not really much of a leader unless you're building other leaders who can succeed. And so I have a lot of people doing that work at a level that's probably better than anything I ever touched. And so, not getting in the way of people, learning that you can give them, and, people have to be accountable for the stuff you provide them. But, in closed doors, you have really tense conversations about what you think is best for the young people that you serve. And then outwardly, you present a united front and you let people strive and you give them the credit when they do. Shawanaki, you had to do that of necessity. And Fresno, you needed to do that because, in my opinion, it was just a better way of leading.
Interesting. So, I once talked to a superintendent. He was kind of grooming me. He wanted me to become a superintendent, and he made my head just big enough to think like, yeah, that's something that I want to do.
Never too late, Gene Tavernetti. This could be, when the need is great.
No, it's too late, buddy. Okay. So, but one of the things he said that I'll never forget, he goes, I always wanted to be a superintendent. He said, and I was so excited. I got to work on my first day and I sat on my desk and I asked myself, what am I supposed to do now? And I'm just wondering, you talked about some people who were in your cabinet who you weren't mentoring per se, but they went out and probably just because of what you were modeling. But you work with aspiring superintendents as well. What do you say to them about what the job actually is versus what the perception might be?
So I do think you have to serve as you're the visual representation of the district, whether you like it or not. And you can never take that mentality and that you can't take that, that mantra away, right? The reality of it is a superintendent's pretty well funded job for a taxpayer funded perspective, but it's not really a job. It's more of a way of living. Like you're still the superintendent in Target in the frozen food section. You think you're there to buy Uncrustables, but you're actually the superintendent of whatever institution. And so you just can't remove that mantle. You just can't ever take it off. So you have to, and your family inherits that reality as well. So you have to play the visual role and you have to be comfortable speaking publicly and you have to be comfortable with people thinking you're full of it. And you have to be a leader to the degree that you're going to alienate people. Now, I had that uniquely, Gene, in that I was the superintendent of the pandemic. Of the 100 biggest districts in America, there were only 4 of us that actually served 2 years on both sides of the pandemic because that was just a meat grinder. And you couldn't do anything that, universally people lauded. People were just mad about everything every day, all the time. And so you just learn, okay, you're going to make people mad. And that's all right. You do what you believe to be in the best interest of kids. And then you just, every night you wake up and you try to do it again. Nobody would argue that what we did in the pandemic was the best possible thing for kids, but we did the best we could with what we had at the time we had it. Yeah. And so you encourage people to do that and to not, and I guess I have some different perspective now. The moment I stepped out of the seat, some 3 weeks later, most of the stuff that I perseverated about, Gene, didn't matter a whole lot. The system ground on and it moved ahead. And while I might have some delusion of grandeur, like, oh my gosh, I played such a big role, the system just moved right on ahead the moment I vacated the space. And so that level of perspective is really good. So I try to teach future superintendents, like, okay, like I know it's hard and it can be very difficult and it's very emotionally fraught, but I'm just telling you in the long run, not everything that you're perseverating on is going to matter all that much. And it's okay if people don't love every decision you make. In fact, show me somebody who's university lauded, and I'll show you a leader that's probably not doing anything of significance in the universe whatsoever. Like leaders, you alienate people by virtue of saying, I'm going to help this person. You've alienated that one without meaning to, and it really has nothing to do with you.
I think you provided a nice segue to talk about militant positivity. You talked about being in the rooms and have to have tough conversation, and then we all go out. So tell us a little bit about actually hashtag militant positivity. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, generally, it started as a hashtag, and I don't
Okay.
know that I put that on the front cover of the book, but to some degree, militant positivity is like a commitment to just stand with kids as a leader, even when things are difficult. I mean, honestly, like most adults that you interact with in the superintendency are on a little bit of their own hustle. They're trying to represent the members that brought them there, or they're trying to represent the constituency that brought them there. And somebody on the inside has to make sure that we acknowledge that children should never have to absorb the cowardice of adults or the chaos that adults can create or political machinations or political ambition. Because when people like stir up unrest or they create political drama or they manufacture division, kids are the ones that end up paying the price for that. I mean, there's just no question. As schools have been the place where the politics of right and left, that came to roost, I think, when we became the enforcement arm of pandemic health policy. But we don't stand, militant positivity is not engaging in the noise or the ego or the theater. It's just saying, hey, we're going to stand with kids. And you got to have a backbone on that. And there's also this like fake binary gene that you either have to be nice or you have to be firm, as though those are on some continuum. Like you either have to choose having a backbone or being kind. And I'm here to tell you that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to have a backbone, right? I mean, sometimes you have to like be willing to stand in the gap.
We didn't talk about this, and I don't expect you to be an expert on this. No, I take it back. I do expect you to be an expert. I'm going to ask a question. The fact that you used the term militant positivity, I think, was that a conscious choice, to get away from toxic positivity and
Yeah, I mean, I think you
contrast?
talk. Yeah, exactly. I think people talk about toxic positivity, which, for your listeners is like, and people have accused me of that. Like, why do you pretend things are great when they're really lousy? Militant is very different. Like, militant positivity is I acknowledge things are lousy. Like, I'm not a fool. I don't say something is red when it's blue. However, I also acknowledge that kids expect me to get up every day. And to date, the sun keeps rising the following morning. So, like, punching out because I believe this thing is too hard or too complex or not engaged enough. Like kids still need people to get up the next morning and to keep going. So militant positivity is way more about, it's not about being Pollyanna. It's about being resilient and just getting yourself back up out of space the next morning and going toward people. And I think, I mean, to some degree, I have a little bit of fight in me, Gene. I think every superintendent needs to have a little bit of the dog in them. Like, you have to be kind of down for the fight. You have to be willing to tangle a little bit. I mean, lovingly, but you have to be not afraid to mix it up a little bit for and on behalf of kids that you serve. But I do think, like, just the willingness to not just be beaten, because kids don't get to pick who the adults are in their system. They don't get to pick the institutions they attend. Generally, they go where they live. They don't get to choose the strategic priorities of the district generally in which they are in. And so they require having adults on the inside who are acting, or at least trying to act on their behalf every day that they possibly can.
You talked about, people accusing you of, this is phony. I worked with a principal probably at least 15 years through several different schools. Every time he'd go to a new school, he'd bring me in to work with his staff, and he was always positive. And I really like this guy. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you can't be that positive. This can't every time I see you. And then we were working together, and he goes, God, excuse me, Gene, I have a problem. I have to talk to this one staff member. So I waited, and he was in there for a few minutes. And then the staff member came out with, I mean, Absolutely. You could tell it had not been a good experience for this person. And he came out and he hitched up his pants and said, "Okay, let's go." I mean, and so I knew right then he was being authentic. It was just like you described. I got to take care of business and stuff we're going on, and everybody else, I can't bring everybody else down because I'm having a kind of a bad day.
One thing I think we know, right? Leaders set the weather in the organization that they're in. Right. Sometimes people won't say hi to somebody because they're afraid that they're going to unload on them. I mean, I think as a leader, you owe it to your people to at least be emotionally within a narrower range so they kind of know what to expect. It creates a safer environment. But I think you need to be like straight up too, and you need to talk about your own frailties and your shortcomings, and you need to be really public about them. If you want people to fail in your organization and not be afraid that they're going to just get chastised or beaten down, you have to be pretty vulnerable with your own shortcomings too. But yeah, hopefully, Gene, I don't know. I can't really control what the historical significance of around me is ever going to be. Like, I just can't control that. But I hope people will say, right, like what you see is what you get with that guy. Like he's pretty authentic. Like I mean, I hope that's the message, is that people think that guy shoots you straight. He may say crazy stuff, or like he may tell you what he thinks, but generally there's not a lot of pretense there. I mean, that's one advantage. Like, tell the truth all the time, so you never have to remember what it is you said. Just always tell the truth.
I think one of the things interesting about superintendents, and you talked about this, so kind of going back a little bit, is that many people who get superintendencies are very good communicators, very good rock guys or women, very positive. They present themselves well in an interview, and then boom. I mean, what's the average length of a superintendent's
Yeah, in a
stay?
major urban, it's only 30 months. So imagine that. 1 year of like learning where things are, 1 year of like creating your own strategic plan. 6 months later, you're out on your ear. That's what I'm out to accomplish, is stability and leadership is critical. Yeah, it's not a long tenured role.
I remember talking to a fellow who I had known for a long time, and he became a principal. He became administrator, became a principal, and then he became a superintendent. And I went to go visit him. He was in a nearby district, a small district, and he just kind of looked at me and he says, "Gene, I've been here for 18 months and nobody's wanted to fire me yet."
That's pretty good.
The expectation was, but you know what? He was one of those guys. He was so polished. What you not only you train do people to be district leaders and then aspiring superintendents. Do you talk about communication styles at all
We
with the
do.
folks?
I teach in the doctoral program here at Fresno State. I teach an executive leadership class, and some of the activities we have are just about, I mean, to some degree, you have to be comfortable on camera. You have to acknowledge that the media is going to interview you. They're going to take 40 minutes of footage and they're going to use the 15 seconds that makes you sound like a complete and utter imbecile, right? So you just have to be mindful about everything that comes. And, I mean, I give advice that I myself desperately need to take, because
Yeah.
I still I've not mastered the concept of just because it comes in your head doesn't mean it needs to come out your mouth. But it is a practiced strategy. And you know it, right? From podcasting, right? There's a practice strategy about engaging the listener and trying to make sure that people feel like they're not, I mean, that's about authenticity too, right? People don't want to feel like they're being conned. So how can you, and feeling comfortable. I mean, that one advantage I have is I'm a little bit of I am kind of chaos personified. I'm pretty ADHD. Everybody who knows me would be able to tell you that right away. And I'm pretty comfortable with that. And so, but talking about, you can't divorce yourself from the fact that you are the visual representation of the system. You can't take that off and give it to another member of your organization. As a superintendent, you acknowledge, like, I'm going to be willing to stand in this space. That is part of, like, it's a way of living and not a job. So once you take, like, if you don't want that level of scrutiny, one, you can be released any given Wednesday. So if safety and security is your number one priority, the superintendency main, and really good people hit the cutting room floor regularly in the superintendency, and that is not a fatal thing, but if you can't handle standing up for your principles and then maybe seeing the door as a result of standing it, like, that may not be it for you either. So you just have to know, like, going in, those are things, but you cannot push away the responsibility to speak to your community. You have to be able to speak in a way that they are going to, it's kind of funny. Like I was the voice on the auto dialer for 10 years. So I'll be talking and like people at McDonald's, I know that voice. Like, anyway, it's a little ironic that I would be known from 10 years of the auto dialer, but that is in some ways in Fresno how people know me.
Well, when you work with in the doctoral program or anytime I know that you do outside work also, consulting with folks, with superintendents, one of the things that I see as healthy when you begin a job, you have to have a level of confidence to think I can do it, but then get into it and realize, ooh, wow, there's a lot to this, and have a little humility. And there's kind of like a curve, to get from that. What are some things that in the beginning superintendents or the folks you work with may have thought was going to be easy, and then it was a lot more difficult than they thought?
Well, I think what you just described is one of the penultimate things for a superintendent, just the acknowledgement that you're going to be confronted with stuff that you didn't even know you didn't know before you get into the job. And then what do you do with that once it surfaces for you that you knew nothing about? I mean, there's a lot of parallels, Gene, with my arrival in higher ed. Like I was fairly convinced that because teaching was at the center, that higher education would be a lot like the K-12 environment, and it could not be more dissimilar. Like I just had no idea how dissimilar it was. And like our dean is going through a search process. Someone's like, hey, you're going to be the dean. Like you have a lot of C-level experience. And that's kind of laughable in higher ed because I'm an assistant professor, which is to say I'm 2 rungs below the dean. No amount of C-level experience on the higher ed side matters one whit here because I don't have a full professorship. And so that never would have dawned on me that like I would be a novice in an environment that I really didn't understand very clearly. And so I think every superintendent gets into that seat and they are confronted with a bunch of stuff that they did not know that they didn't know. I think just being okay with that and acknowledging it publicly, like I have much to learn in this, and then finding trust. Like the key thing is, right, can we just agree, like not all the leaders are represented on the org chart. You have to find trusted, like your school psychologist exemplar that you gave. I got to find people in the organization whom I trust to shoot me totally straight about what's happening here so that I can get a clear sense of what it is I'm seeing and then I can make better decisions about it. But that can be hard as a new person, like when you don't know anybody and you don't really know who to trust to put yourself out there. Because, everybody sees the superintendent through a lens, like they're a vehicle to accomplish something, or they're a barrier standing in my way, or they're irrelevant. I do what I want, regardless of them. But the key thing is, how can you build relationships quickly that will provide you, critical insights so that you are making decisions on the basis of what's real and not what you perceive? Because the truth of it is, the higher you go on the org chart, the less truth you hear. People tell you some sanitized version of reality, but it's not necessarily representative of what's real.
Well, something that I think is real is you have to listen to the board members. And what kind of advice do you give? Because I know I have a friend who was actually a partner initially in my business. And he said the first time he was a superintendent, his first superintendent's job, he had a trustee who would call him and be on the phone every night for hours. And he just didn't know, he was too new to just say, you know what, no, this is not acceptable. What kind of advice do you give, not board relations, but interpersonal with board folks?
For sure. I think that's probably that skill may well be the crux of like longevity in the superintendency. Like for me, I think first and foremost, this sounds a little negative, but you would never confuse the board members who are your supervisor as a superintendent with your friends, right? You can be you should always be friendly. You should always be amicable, but never lose sight of the fact that generally they're there because they got many times board members run on a platform of everything is broke and I'm the person you need to bring in here to fix everything that's broke here. So that's potentially one of the things you're dealing with. And then many times they are not educators by profession, which is fine. They have as community members, they have a vested interest in what's happening with the kids, but you have some obligation to educate them on what it is their core work is. A board member does 3 things. They hire and fire the superintendent, they manage the budget, and they set policy. Now, on a practical note, I met with all of my board members monthly, in both settings. And I learned in Fresno, it's a great idea to meet with them over a meal because I do think like anytime you're having food with people, it just changes the interaction pattern a little bit. It's a little more amicable and friendly. And you can, share pleasantries, find out about their family, and then talk about kind of the brass tacks things. You need to be with them on the issues that are of significance to you so that when you go to the board meeting ought to be reflective of the sweat equity you put into your conversations with the board before you get in public in the public's meeting. If the board member has a real issue with something that you are pushing as a priority of the district, there ought to be ample opportunity for discussion around that before you go out there publicly and either put them on blast or they put you on blast because you didn't have the ability to talk about it ahead of time. So I think anything you can do, and not every vote went my way. Probably 98% of them did, but invariably, and and you shouldn't expect unanimity from your board. Like that's an overestimation. They're not a rubber stamp of your wills or wishes, but you need to be able to communicate clearly what your desires are, and you need to really listen for what they are out to accomplish. And to some degree, it's a Venn diagram of what are their interests and do those things represent what's good for kids, and where those circles intersect, that's the direction you travel. But you have to be with them enough. Like calling you every night is not on the list of available choices, right? I mean, like there has to be some boundaries in terms of the interaction patterns between the board and the superintendent.
Thinking about, your communications, with the board members and being able to speak individually, there's a very different dynamic versus, we know sitting up on the dais. And even though nobody wants to say, even without television cameras, sitting up on the dais means you're gonna behave differently. Were there trustees who did not want to have those one-on-ones because they were saving it up?
For sure. I mean, I think, yes, I still would put myself out there in that way, but oh no, there were people that were wanting to score political points. And I mean, and in Fresno, we're very unique. I mean, Fresno Unified, it spans, for California, it is California. So nobody would argue that this is a progressive state, but Fresno is remarkably purple, right? I had everything from the extreme right to the extreme left and everywhere in between on the same board. And so you do have people that are going to like trigger the gotcha. The ones that I appreciated the most are the ones who would say to me privately, Gene, I'm going to punch you in the face tonight. Here's where it's going to happen. Here's what you can reasonably expect. And then invariably, they would step into that space and they would do exactly what they said, which was punch me in the face on something, right? I mean, that's kind of the best you could hope for. Yeah, I mean, not that I really want to be punched in the face. I didn't relish all of that, but I think
Right.
like people that can have with you, you can't really expect unanimity from amongst your board members. You're not all there on the same mission, on the same issue with the wide array of things that come. I mean, Fresno's a $1.7 billion budget. That's a lot of stuff that's going to happen in $1.7 billion. The idea that you're going to agree on all of it is just massively oversimplified. And so, can you create an environment where people kind of know what the rules of engagement are? If you tell me you're going to punch me in the face, then I know how to react and I can respond in kind. But truthfully, like from the superintendent's perspective, you'd never see me browbeat or, I mean, for the most part, I may have lost my temper, I guess, maybe once or twice. But your job, in my opinion, as the chief executive is to always present as sensible. Right. I mean, I think like at minimum, you have to like appear, you have to be the adult. I'll constantly take the role of the adult in the space.
Well, I don't know if I talked to you about this before when we met and chatted briefly, but I had worked in Fresno Unified at a magnet school. And I truly believe that the future of education is going to be a diverse number of schools. We won't have a school system necessarily, we'll have a system of schools. They will have some sort of identity that moves them forward. And when I was at this magnet school, there was one or two champions that had been there from the beginning. And I will tell you that working in this large district, it was difficult. It was a fight sometimes to get people to realize, no, we are serving more people. We are serving people by having this identity, and we need you to support it. We need to, I don't want to say we need to bend the rules a little bit, but there needs to be some consideration for this school has been successful. We need to keep the things that make it successful going. Was that a pressure that you felt, or I don't even say a pressure, but was it a discussion about those schools?
For sure. I think honestly, like The key thing is how do you provide as much as you can for as many people as you can over the course of time. And I think like allowing wide ranging variety in that, like not every community wants exactly the same thing for its young people. So I think offering an array of choice, like you never saw me fight charters. I just didn't do that. I think good charters in our system, like a University High or like the work that's happening at like Kepler now, or like good charters make us better as a district. And then same thing, like in our own internal organizations, whether that's design science or our Fresno Unified. I have
You can't,
not,
no,
I've
you
not divorced myself
yeah,
entirely mentally.
born and bred there,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, the reality of it is like having some options for folks, I think is really healthy and good. And I think
Yeah.
we can learn a lot. And honestly, your best principals kind of know how to navigate that. They know how to meet the district obligations where we're asking every school to kind of conform to some mentality, but they're always putting their own individual school spin on it. And they're always respectful of the professionalism of the people that work in that space and navigating that. That's maybe the charm of the principalship. Principal is a hard job because everybody's like both sides are coming at you, parents are going through you to get to the district and the district is going through you to get to parents. And so everything kind of revolves or goes through the door of the principalship. But an effective principal is able to recognize the experience that their long-termers have and give gravitas to that and give value to the institutional, knowledge that they have, while also trying to find a way to make sure that we're lockstep with our colleagues too, so that we have common language around making things better for kids. But it's a little bit of, it's not perfect. If we had it all dialed in, we would have, manifested. I read an article today. People are really interested in the Mississippi Miracle and how can we recreate what happened in Mississippi. But unless you're willing to do everything Mississippi did, which is that you're going to hold back kids who are not met the grade, like unless you're willing to do that, you're not going to have a miracle.
I'm going to tell you, okay, we're going to go off track a little bit since you brought up the Mississippi Miracle, because I had someone on to talk about that, and she was telling me about it. And this just didn't sound good to me. This, you didn't get your reading score, so we're going to hold you back in third grade. And I said, that's a tough one. What if it's only reading? There are a lot of things that go on. There's a maturity leap, whatever. And her answer was, and this came from Mississippi. She didn't make this up. But what they would tell parents is, oh, we understand. And they would have given them the assessment results for a long period of time. So it wasn't a surprise. But the thing that really got to me is they said, we're going to give you our best teacher. He's going to have the best teacher next year. And if I'm a parent, I'm thinking, what the hell happened in the prior years?
Yeah, right.
Why didn't you give them the best? So my concern with folks looking at the Mississippi Miracle, it's like anything. Bob, you've been around when we had the Sanger Miracle. And there was everybody, what did they call it? Edutourism. Everybody's got to go see what's happening,
Right.
there. Well, guess what? It's not all happening. And what you see many times, they'll go back and they will do some superficial part of it, but not the essence that made it good. So
Right.
that's what
That's
I worry
exactly
about.
right. Yep,
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not about it's anyway. I do think kudos to them for finding a solution that works for them. You just leave it there, right? And you're thankful for that. And dear God, can we find a solution that works for us?
Well, there's Bob being positive and me being not that hopeful.
That's real though. That's I don't know. Like I don't know where your belief system is on that, but I do believe that actually.
Well, Bob, I could talk to you about this forever. Do you have any questions for me?
I do. Obviously, this is the Better Teaching Podcast. You've spent a lot of your time like cutting through the wheat from the chaff. And so I guess I would ask, from your perspective, I'm helping young people. One of the things I do is I teach existing teachers that want to take on a vice principalship for the very first time. And they're placed in this space where they're leaving the classroom for the first time and they're kind of seeing things at 100,000 foot vision for the first time. And they're having tasked with like, I can't move the needle on the virtue of my own skills and abilities as a teacher. I now have to move it through the skills and abilities of other adults. So I guess for them and on their behalf, what are some of the biggest mistakes schools make when they confuse this idea of good intention with good instruction? Like what advice would you have me give to them in terms of what constitutes legitimate good instruction and what maybe just falls in the category of good intention?
Well, I don't know if you're just, returning the favor because I talked about militant positivity. But I truly believe that, and this is the work I've been doing since 2003, is that there are many teachers who don't know how to instruct well. And I think one of the things I may talk about, probably not with you, but maybe somebody else in the teacher credentialing department, is that the things that they're learning not necessarily are the most important things that they need to know. And when they talk about instruction, they talk about it, but they're not trained. There's not a training, there's not a practice, there's not a modeling. And even with the what's it called when you do your first student teaching and you have a supervisor
Or your
and
initial student teaching.
yeah, there just isn't, there just isn't that. And I'm not saying it because teachers are bad. I'm saying it because the system failed them. We would go in and do training, and we've always trained in explicit instruction. And they would say, why didn't I learn this at the university? And I say, tell your friends, to go talk to somebody, So I think if we're getting back to the vice principal, there's number one, you have to know instruction, vice principal. Chances are there were a lot of reasons you were selected as vice principal. Probably not the top of the list is because you were the best teacher. Not necessarily.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you can't be, but I just don't think that's top of the list. So the other thing that I believe is, gosh, I used to be embarrassed about talking about my books. So you got to buy Teach Fast, which is about explicit instruction. To me, that's baseline. Every teacher needs to have that baseline. And the same thing now, if you are going to go help with instruction, then as a vice principal, you should also have that baseline knowledge. And then read my second book, Maximizing the Impact of Coaching Cycles, because it talks about all the things that we do wrong. And one of those things is that, oh, now I'm vice principal, now I'm going to go help teachers. That's a whole different skill. Teaching and assisting teachers is a whole different skill.
No question.
And it's one of those things you don't have a second chance to make a good first impression. So you better be prepared, and it's better to shut up and just wait till you have more to talk about or how to talk about it better or something. But don't be overconfident in going in and thinking, I'm going to change this teacher. No, that's not going to happen.
That's great. Thank you for that, Sage. One maybe other thing, like when you go into a classroom for 5 minutes, how do you know if real learning is likely happening there? What would be your kind of benchmark?
I try to talk people, the schools that I work with, or if anybody asks me, I try to talk them out of going in and doing 5-minute observations to determine if kids are learning, or 10 minutes. I tell them, go in and do that 5 minutes to get to know the teacher. Get to know, because you go in and instead of worrying about, did the kids learn in this 5 minutes, see who that teacher is. Go in frequently. Go in for 5 minutes at a different time, because you know what? It could have been the worst day of that teacher's life.
Sure, no question.
And so you need enough data to be able to talk to teachers on an individual basis, because that's one of the things that teachers are so upset about with regards to PD. Oh, this doesn't apply to me. Oh, you're going to come in and tell me how to teach? You don't even know me. All of those things are very valid. And so I'm giving this advice as if that's what I did when I was a VP. But of course I didn't.
Well, I'll tell them. I agree with you. And we are equally yoked in the idea that nothing replaces relationships in terms of building school culture, no question.
All right. Bob, where can folks find you if they're looking for you on the internets?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm on LinkedIn and social media, Facebook, or you can look at militantpositivity.com. I need to kind of update that website, but the book Militant Positivity is available on Amazon in a couple different formats. Or you can find me at bob@militantpositivity.com. Like, that's probably the easiest way to reach me. You can send me an email there. Happy to help with anybody who's on this journey of trying to help leaders become resilient and acknowledge that somebody has to speak for and on behalf of the kids that we serve. And you have the opportunity to do that in a way that is not driven by the meme generation. It doesn't have to be hateful or mean-spirited. You can do it in a way with an open heart and still have a firm spine.
Great last words. Thank you so much for being a guest.
My distinct pleasure, Gene. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
You got it.
If you're enjoying these podcasts, tell a friend. Also, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can follow me on Blue Sky at G Tavernetti, on Twitter, X, at G Tavernetti, and you can learn more about me and the work I do at my website, tesscg.com. That's TESSCG.com, where you will also find information about ordering my books, Teach Fast, Focused, Adaptable, Structured Teaching, and maximizing the impact of coaching cycles.